Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show, Living Heaven on Earth, with my co host, Dennis Gaither. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you and everyone
Yes,
else.
I'm so glad that you're here and that you're bringing this fabulous topic of there is a light within you. And you created the show notes for this show. And of course, you always bring us these beautiful quotes from the Course in Miracles. There is a light within you which cannot die, whose presence is so holy that the world is sanctified because of you. A Course in Miracles. And I think it's brilliant as always, Dennis, just like I told you last week, that you always know exactly what it is that we need to hear right now. And I just want to let our audience know, the people that are coming in today for the first time, you're a spiritual teacher and you have been teaching the Course in Miracles in your community for over 20 something years. Is that
20
right?
plus, yeah, 20 plus years, right?
20 plus years. So, and it's something that you have practiced and have been leading courses over the years. And, and then coming here to the show, being able to share with us from a spiritual sense, from a spiritual perspective of what it is and what it is that we can do right now at this time in our life, right? With
Right.
the whole pandemic that's going on. And then also, it's a Holy Week. It's 2 days
It is.
before Easter,
It's
it's
Good
Good
Friday.
Friday,
Yes, it's a
right?
it's a holy week. Yes.
The Holy Week. So it's wonderful. Now, I noticed in the show notes that you were talking about how do we get beyond what most people are facing right now, and that's fear.
Yep. Well, that I will get to that. That's very much in personal and my personal experience of it as well. But I'll just say just briefly what probably the most pertinent passage in A Course in Miracles for today is in the preference where it says that it provides a way for some people to find their own internal teacher.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we're talking about. Not talking about specifically about A Course in Miracles. Actually, it's more about finding your own internal teacher. And that's what I really want to share today. But there's a context for it all, which is right now we're in times where there is a lot of fear. I mean, there's this virus that's going through, and it's creating a sense of fearfulness, maybe sometimes outrage, uh, sometimes mistrust in the systems which we hoped would protect us. There's a lot of things like that going on right now, and I'm certainly affected by that along with everybody else. I'm not in any way, shape, or form above that. But that passage there about there is a light in you which cannot die, I've always found that passage really inspiring. And it's kind of like it's a reminder there's something in me that is beyond this body, this personality, which, that can die. But there is something beyond that. But it also suggests there's a light, there's a little way through this whole thing here. But I want to share an experience. And this happened yesterday morning. And it seems like I always get to have my own lesson in whatever I'm going to be talking about. And that's useful. And so yesterday morning, I was still lying in bed. I was just in that sort of waking up state. And I woke up really experiencing a lot of fear. Probably about the most I've experienced in this whole situation. And there were all kinds of, and so what I've learned to do is just to allow it, to turn towards it, just to allow it. Because the feeling of fear always has a lot of fearful, catastrophic thoughts. And there were lots of different kinds of thoughts. I'm probably not the only one they've occurred to about all of society breaking down in chaos and examples of chaotic leadership right now. And there are many of these kinds of thoughts that are going on. And in that moment of being really kind of blended with the fear, I'm locked in, and it felt constricted. There's a felt sense of being constricted and locked in, and so first thing is rest the mind. Rest, accept, and trust is a key throughout this whole process. But the first is just to let the mind rest a little bit. That can come many ways. But it started for me then by recognizing that this is a fearful part of me. It's not all of me. It's kind of by remembering that this will pass. So things can kind of slow down. Things can calm down a little bit. I can take a little breath and just kind of say to the part of me that's feeling fearful, I see how fearful, I feel how scared you are right now. And there's something that happens when I do that. As initially I'm sort of locked into all the fear feelings and thoughts. This is all that's there in my awareness. But by simply taking a breath, finding a little place that can relax for just even a tiny bit, and just kind of say, I see you. Now that has brought something else in the field too. There's brought another presence. So now there's not just the fearful part, but there's something else in there too. It's just the beginnings of another voice that's there. And once that's there, then, I can exercise a choice. I can give my attention here. I can give my attention here to either the voice for fear or this voice that has a little bit of a stillness or a calmness to it. And wherever I give my attention, it's going to grow. And as I can kind of start to feel myself more aligned with that place of calmness, I can turn towards the fearful place and hold it in some compassion and some kindness. And that connects me even deeper with a bigger presence, with a deeper presence, a presence of love inside. So now there's more and more space inside. So the other voice is growing now, it starts to grow. And I can start to listen to it a little bit, and I can let it guide me out of the fear. But it does that always in tiny little increments. If I just kind of want to, oh my God, I got to get rid of this and run headlong out of it, what that is, I'm not listening to the voice for love inside, the voice for stillness inside. I'm listening to the fearful voice, which is going to just lead me into a more fearful place. I might fix the immediate problem, but the fearful way of looking at the world is going to stay. So I started listening for little prompts. And it's not like there's this voice that said, Dennis, do this. It's just little prompts. The first one was get physical comforting. Just kind of, and so, I have a full length, nice flannel covered, about 4 or 5 feet long body pillow. And I just snuggled with that pillow. Mm-hmm. And just really took in the comfort from that, just on a physical level, but it had a calming effect. So there's a little step out of the fear. The fear is still there. I'm still experiencing it. I'm not as blended with it, though, not as identified. So it's not about pushing it away, getting rid of it. It's about starting to not be quite as identified. So pretty soon it was, okay, go ahead and get up, have your morning tea, take a little quiet time. Still, I'm still sitting with the fear. It hasn't gone away, but it's becoming less and less compelling, being slowly guided out of the fear. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of was sort of then, okay, go ahead and look on your computer. And I popped up my computer, and there was an article, and it was an article from the New York Times, and it was kind of talking about the situation, but it had kind of a hopeful tone to it. I thought, I like that article. And then the next little prompt was share it. This is on Facebook, so I'll share it. And then the next one was, but write something about it. And I had no idea what to write about it. Maybe first thing was, maybe just say, hey, this is really cool, you should read this. Then it's sort of like, then I immediately sense, no, you can do better. There's a little more than that. Okay, I'm going to surrender and just see what wants to be said. And what came was about 3 or 4 paragraphs that I shared. And then there was something about sharing it, extending it, sharing it, and then attaching it to the same picture that I used to represent this, had planned to use for this talk about there's a light in you, with a picture of the older woman with this lovely light in her eyes. And so what I shared there was actually something that was given to me, but it was meant to be shared, extended, and that strengthened it. And I want to read that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read it here. Let's see if I can find where okay, here it is. And I can only take minimal credit for the authorship, actually, other than a little surrender to let it come through. And what it says is, in crisis, there is opportunity, and a choice that is not only a choice of direction, but a choice of who we are in our relationship to turbulent events and to one another. And this is first for me, but then it's for whoever else is listening here. There's a fearful voice in each of us. There's a fearful voice in me that directs us to find safety in stockpiling, hoarding, blaming, and protecting our own little interests. That fearful voice will inevitably beget more fear as we feel more and more alone in our struggle and fall prey to an us against them mentality. If we step back, take a moment, a breath, there's another voice inside all of us that we can listen to. It's the softer, gentler voice that's easily drowned out by the more fearful voice. But it is there. It abides patiently within, and it reminds us of our wholeness, of our unity, our joining with everyone, with all that is. It's a voice that speaks truly with love. And it shows me there's a better way. It connects us with each other in our common humanity and with our source by whatever name you prefer to represent divine wisdom. It guides us inevitably to a deeper knowing of who we are, the love that we are in our deepest truth as we choose to follow it. And this last part was really important to me. And as we choose to follow in this gentler way, others will join us. And there was something that I felt some hope coming up really within me with that, because I know there's so many people joining together. My dear friends, let us all extend this invitation, not by preaching or cajoling, but by our example. That is true leadership. And as the day went on, then all these little things happened. There were connections with people. People called me. I called people being of service, doing what they can. There were a retired nurse making masks and insisting on just maybe a little something to help with materials, but refusing any more compensation than that. And it just, the inspiration was everywhere in the sense of people taking their leadership cues from within themselves, being guided by a loving voice. And I could feel myself just being a part of that something larger. And I would say at that point that I was really guided out of the fear in little steps, just listening to that little inner voice, guided out. And that's key. That was key.
It was key because you were completely present with this huge pocket of energy that you found yourself in that morning. Mm-hmm. And you stayed with it and transcended it through love and presence, mm-hmm. step by step with the wisdom and bringing love to just, your awareness and everything that you were doing, which that is true leadership, is because you were being the example of love. And so you were mm-hmm. practicing that, and through it, you liberated yourself and you liberated others, because others are going to be benefiting from that experience because of it.
Mm-hmm. I just trust that. And I'm benefiting from others doing the same thing. And the transcending of that fearful place was not so much a rising above it, so much as actually being present with it. Mm-hmm. And in being present with it and inviting another perspective, seeing it with different eyes, it became less threatening.
Yes.
But that is a form of transcending. Indeed, it is.
Well, what I think too is I was doing a webinar a couple of weeks ago on love. Love loves away the fear. And one of the things that I was talking about in that webinar was exactly what you're saying, is not to make the fear go away, not to push the fear away, but to invite it in and be with it and sit with it.
Absolutely.
It's kind of the same idea of not, a lot of teachers out there have said, to get rid of the ego. And I've never really bought into that. It didn't resonate.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. It's like, nope, I want to shift the relationship between my ego and,
Yeah.
so not get rid of the ego, but to, let spirit lead, and do a relationship switch. And that's basically how I communicate. But it's kind of like the same idea, is
Absolutely.
not getting rid of the fear, but being with it, and allowing the love that we are to take over naturally, organically, through our awareness. Yeah.
What is transcended in that and let go of are the beliefs that are driving the fear.
Yeah.
That is, those are seen through and seen not to be true. And so that is, and I thank you for bringing up that about getting rid of the ego. If I try to get rid of the ego in me or anyone else, it's a form of attack, which is basically the ego. It's just the ego dressed in spiritual clothes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work very well to try to do that. But maybe it would be worthwhile, maybe, though, to talk a little bit more about, because we kind of alluded to those two voices, the two voices,
Yeah.
and because I certainly experienced them both, and an awareness that usually for most of my life and for most of us, we're only aware of that ego's voice. Actually, it is usually something for most of us that comes along over time, that we become more and more familiar with that other voice. And but that voice, the fearful voice inside me, is basically, it seems to be saying things about the world, but it's really saying things about myself. It says, Dennis, who you are is this body, and who you are is this self-concept. The body can be taken out by a little teeny virus. The self-concept can be taken out by an unkind word. So if I'm identified with that, if I really think that's what I am, the fear is pretty justified there. And part of what that voice will tell me all the ways that I have screwed up, which then will leave me feeling unworthy and even deserving of some of these bad happenings. And it internal to itself, it's very internally consistent. So you can always find evidence to support it from outside.
Yeah.
The other one, I'll say a little bit more about that one. It's kind of it's a quieter voice. It's kind of the one we have to actually turn to. It doesn't have that aggressive quality of imposing itself, but it's abiding. I experience it in kind of an inner representation, as sort of a little background that will step forward if I turn to it. And it's not like a distinct thing. It's more of just a general feeling of kindness. Sometimes it'll be represented as a figure of an inner guide. Sometimes some of my inner guides come represented as Jesus or Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are representations that seem to be helpful if I'm really having, in my fear thoughts and having a hard time connecting here. Those representations are really useful, because I call them representations and symbols, but they really feel like real beings in there to me. But so I just make that distinction clear.
Well, can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about, Jesus, you talk about the Magdalene. As a matter of fact, this morning I had this conversation with someone that we need those examples of those beloved archetypes that showed us the way on how to act in love in times of fear. And like in our like Jesus, how would Jesus act in that way, when fear came, and how would he act and behave and apply love? And how would Mary Magdalene act and behave and apply love in fear, when surrounded by fear? And when we want to really bring that unconditional love and that true form of oneness and unity to the present moment, of when we're faced with that fear of the lower self that we find ourselves in, that's when we're really truly acting out the highest possible way of our divinity.
Yeah, beautiful. So I actually find, when I actually use guides in that way, it's more about what I actually don't necessarily actually find them being more of often a comforting kind of presence.
Mm.
And I don't find myself going the direction of how would they act, because I don't know how they would have historically acted. It's more I just feel the presence in me right now, and then I just kind of just touch, feel little prompts or whatever seems to be coming. I don't get. I'm still very much a learner in this whole thing, so
We all are.
I want to not present myself overly here, but I can share what I can share, and so that's what I do. And that might, a year from now, it might be quite different. Who knows? Who knows? And I want to say there's a lot of different ways that one that you have suggested there. What would Jesus do, or Mary Magdalene, or Buddha, or whoever?
Yeah.
Is one that many people find useful. It actually is one that a lot of people find useful.
Yeah, I find, like, I understand what you're saying when you're talking about that. For you, you feel the presence, and
Mm-hmm.
and that is the way that that it works for you. And like, um, when I say what would Jesus do, what would Mary Magdalene do, it is again taking an action, a form of action
Mm-hmm.
of what would love do in the present moment.
Sure.
Well, how do we behave? How do we act in the present moment? Because
Yeah.
so and I guess the whole doing part is I guess taking an action. And I think in your description, it is more of an abiding presence and being present at one with the energy.
At one with the energy, and really paying attention to subtle little prompts.
Mm-hmm.
Just subtle little prompts, and um, and it's it's a learning process, learning to trust those prompts. I'm still
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah.
but I will just tell you, yesterday morning it worked out pretty darn well. And the more that happens, and the more trust there is, because I
Yeah.
was really in a lot of fear yesterday morning, and by the end of the day, I was actually feeling pretty wonderful.
So you had a wonderful day. You had a
I
wonderful day.
did.
You
I
had a
did.
wonderful day moving through all that energy and being present with all of it.
Yes, and with a number of other people over the course of the day too.
That was fun.
It was good. It was good. Of course, it was all through this medium now. So, but that was still good. That was still good.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say a little bit more though. This quieter inner voice. We have our own personal experience of it. It's kind of personal, but it really is it really is a personal manifestation of something a lot bigger. And it's a fundamental. I find it really key, actually, that there's a larger beingness. There's a much larger beingness, something bigger than this little self that I have, and you can kind of call it a being or a beingness. What symbol you want to use is less, but there's a sense that there is something there that guides us, that loves us, that cares about us, and the other part of it, which I think is what often gets in the way for a lot of people, is just feeling a sense of I'm worthy of receiving that. And if we've been listening to the fearful voice, it has said all the times we screwed it up and we're not worthy. And so that really creates an obstacle to us getting in touch with that larger, really getting in touch. And that's why the practice of forgiveness is so important because it's by healing. It's whether it's in projected form, and I think I'm forgiving somebody else, or if it's really just it's all really just forgiving myself. It's really removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence.
Mm-hmm.
And coming
Which is your tagline, by the way.
Pardon?
Which is your
Yeah.
tagline.
Oh, that is my tagline. Yes, that is my tagline. And so that's what that is. So a little bit about it. So then we kind of come to then, okay, suppose that I am sort of in my fearful place here. How do I get there? How do I get there? And how do I not get there? That might be that's quite not accurate. How do I bring that other awareness in? And really, it starts with a sense of willingness and a sense of trust that it is there.
Yeah,
And
sense of
that,
awareness.
Yeah, but the willingness is really key. There has to be a little sense of willingness. There's a space around. There's a little space around whatever it is my mind is holding, whether it is, uh, although either fear directly or all those things that are derived from fear, like our anger, our despair, our guilt,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things. There's a little willingness to have a little space around it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that takes a little time. Sometimes I need to calm my fearful place down a little bit, like with some physical comforting.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good to know that, isn't it? Because it's again to know that okay, what would help you right now is to know, okay, like for instance, you have that body pillow that helped. What else would help? What else would help somebody else that may be listening to this?
It's very individualized,
Yeah.
and when we are flooded with whatever emotion, there is the thing we call a window of tolerance. And when we kind of go outside that, we're so flooded that it's hard to bring much presence to it. Too little, and it's hard to bring much awareness. There is an optimal window that we can work with, and with practice, that window gets bigger. We can tolerate more and more emotions and still stay present with them. But the window to kind of bring things more in, so physical comforting, that was very useful. But sometimes there's something really valuable about a caring friend.
Yes.
This
Somebody
is
just presence.
somebody's present. I mean, this is a way we can really help each other. I've certainly been in that role during this time with others, and they've been in that role with me. I'm talking about kind of how we can find our inner comforter here, but we don't completely outgrow our need for relationship for others as well.
There's so much when you can be vulnerable in your state of wherever you are, and you can be vulnerable in a safe space with someone that will just listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that can happen, the healing that can happen there, where you can reveal yourself authentically and openly,
Absolutely.
vulnerably, in safety.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is so healing. So Dennis, we haven't taken a break, but we are now due for our next break.
Okay. Okay. So I'll continue after the break.
Yeah, let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue on this very special conversation around including fear and allowing love to melt it away. We'll be right back. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. We're back. You're listening to the Kornelia Stephanie Show, and I'm with Dennis Gaither today. And during the break, we were talking about, or even before we went to break, we were talking about how it's so helpful to sometimes have that loving friend or that counselor or that coach or that mentor, someone that is a witness to you, right, Dennis?
Absolutely. Well, as human beings, there was a wonderful teacher, Ron Kurtz, who was my Hakomi teacher, who used to say, and it's really stuck with me, as human beings, when we're in a place of distress, there are two things. One is we need to feel loved, and we need to feel gotten.
Yeah.
And the feeling gotten means somebody gets me, they understand, they get how I'm feeling. And there is an art to communicating. I get how you're feeling. I see that you're pretty upset. I get how upset you are, without necessarily buying into the story. So it's not negating the story, but it's actually being really present with the storyteller.
Yeah.
There is a connection that happens with that.
Well, and can I add something to that? And that is, is basically what you're doing is the person is holding space without
Absolutely.
having to come up with a solution, because
No solution needed.
no
Just the
solution.
presence.
Exactly. And I think that right there is the big distinction to make, because if the person doesn't know that they're just there to hold space, they might, want to offer solutions or take it on, like you just said. But
Right.
that's
It's
not what.
usually, it's usually less helpful unless there's specific advice being sought, but some little communication that says, I get how you're feeling in some way.
So huge.
I get that this is really hard for you. I'm really seeing how sad you are about this. It's scary, huh? those kind of things that let the person know, I get how you're feeling.
That's so
That's
beautiful.
really important.
Key.
And so, but we can actually learn to do this to some degree on our own. And with practice, we do more and more because we actually do have that other voice inside. We do have that. But just to kind of talk a little bit about, so let's say that I actually am, just like I was, kind of locked into this fearful place. Boom. So it starts with kind of letting the mind quiet down, a little place of willingness, a little space. And I can step back and just acknowledge. I see, like I might do if you were upset, I might say, I see how upset you are. We can do that within ourselves. It's like there's something in me that can say, I see how upset you are. And that invites another presence. There's this part of me that's really upset, and there's part of me that's witnessing that and can hold a compassionate space for it, just like we can with each other. And then that grows. And as we just hold that part of ourselves that is inferior in a place of compassion, it can start to give us little clues as to what it wants. Maybe it needs to be comforted. Maybe it needs to be told it's okay. We can do that with ourselves. Or maybe the little prompt that said, hold the pillow, just comfort pillow. It's almost like holding that part of myself and comforting it.
Beautiful.
So you just follow and just trust the small prompts. Don't feel like you need some big solution that's going to get you out of this fearful place now, because that is probably the voice of fear that's telling you that, and it's just going to create more fear. Take a breath, find that place, that rest. There's a little place of rest. There's a quiet center inside. The more you access it, the more easier it is to find. But the more you do that, it grows. The more you are aware of both presences there, and you shift your attention, you have your willingness to be, I'm willing to feel myself as part of this larger stillness. And you just listen for the little prompts, which usually, for me at least, they're just little intuitive prompts. There's not like some voice that says, do this. Maybe it is for some people. For me, it's not that. And you follow those little prompts and you let it guide you out of fear. And it's not about dismissing or exiling the fear. It's about seeing through it. It's about seeing some alternative to the fearful thoughts. I'm not really alone. The chaos I think I see outside has to do with the chaos that's in here. And as I bring that presence in, the chaos subsides and I feel comforted.
I think another key piece with all of that is that most of the time when we would have places to go outside, we would run away. We would go out and we would go to work. We would ignore whatever.
Yes.
We would go. What is a beautiful gift right now, the larger gift is that, we're at home now to be present with what you said, the chaos that's within, and to actually have the time now to do the work in that sense, right?
Well, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because sometimes we may be in a circumstance that we kind of have to deal with the circumstance. We don't have time to do all this. But what we can do is actually just tell that part of us that's holding upset, I see how upset you are. I will come back later.
Yes.
I'll come back this evening and attend to you, or I will come back I'll bring this, if I'm seeing a therapist or a counselor, I'll bring this to my counselor. And then you have to follow through. It's kind of like, but it's kind of like the little child who's kind of in a panic. And if they actually just know that, the parent will be home in 10 minutes, they can hold it. So you can actually develop a relationship. And when we have that, we call it kind of capital S self-presence in relationship with these other parts, there's healing there. And you can actually tell them, okay, I can't deal with this right now. I will come back to you.
Yeah. And the big thing is that, like you said, that you come back and that you follow through.
Yeah, you do have to do that.
You have to do that. You do have to establish that level of trust to know that part of you that is seeking your attention, that you will come back and get to it, right? With
Right.
love, honor, and respect. Yeah.
It's a way of, yep, it is a way of love, honoring, and respecting ourselves. And as we do that, then we start to feel ourselves as worthy of love, honor, and respect. And so then we will call those kind of situations to us because we, more where we are love, honoring, and respecting of others and receiving that ourselves because we're feeling it inside. So what with a lot of experiences like this, what happens is that abiding presence inside begins to feel like more and more who I really am.
Yeah.
And so that ego voice is never going to go away, at least not, well, maybe for some saint it did, but for most of us mortals, it's not going to while we're here in bodies, but it starts to be something that we can be less identified with. It's like, oh, there it is again. Okay, we get better and better at it. And usually the way it works out is that whatever the universe or something then gives you some new lessons, so you get to. But it's actually about getting some deeper. It's about deeper healing too. So everything's an opportunity, and that was even this whole situation with the pandemic that is going on, and at a certain level, there's a certain tragedy to that. I won't want to minimize that. But there is also opportunity there as well. There's some opportunity for something for us, even in the face of personal tragedy is possible. I mean, about 30 years ago, I lost a brother in a plane crash, and it was a personal tragedy. I went through profound grief that I just for a period of time felt inconsolable, and yet there were some really transformative gifts that came out of that. It was really it really set my path really more on a spiritual path. I had instances of communication with him, not in body, that really said, we're not bodies. There's more to us than just a body.
And it was because of the tremendous loss that you experienced with your brother's passing that what I'm hearing you say is that set you on a spiritual path of seeking more what's
Well,
next.
it was actually offered during the experience, but I went into the grieving process absolutely wholeheartedly. I held absolutely nothing back. I was kind of a blubbering mess. But there was something of that surrender. It was actually almost the surrender to that
Yeah.
created the gaps where something else could come in. It would be a whole story about that I don't necessarily want to go down that path too much. But
Yeah, but you did say 30 years ago is when your brother passed. Was that?
yeah, it was about 32 years ago. Yes.
Yeah, it's so I can identify with that experience because I had that experience when my stepfather died, and that set me on the spiritual path. Is when that loss
Yeah.
happened. That's when I started awakening and going, whoa, so I can understand, I can identify that awakening, that deep grief, that loss, tremendous loss.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want to just kind of touch on a few other things here about there's some other practices that are useful, that I use at different times, and I call them bridges. So, maybe I'm not quite, maybe I'm not quite able to get to this idea that there's another voice there inside. Maybe that's a little bit, maybe I'm not quite sure I want to buy that, or maybe I just don't have a lot of it, or maybe I just don't, for whatever reason, it doesn't appeal to me. There are some little practices that I call bridging. And I want to just name a few, and maybe we'll see what time we have here. But one of them is a practice of gratitude. Gratitude is it's very nourishing. There've been psychological studies that grateful people are happier, but it's on a deeper level. It's a bridge. Gratefulness is a bridge from this constricted point of view to something bigger, because it implies a willingness to receive something. It is, and that's not just saying thank you, but it's actually feeling it inside. It takes a certain space in order to feel that, and one can take that practice to a pretty deep level. I think in one of our previous talks where we talked about gratitude, we talked about a gratitude walk. of just kind of going for a walk, which now that might not be walking outside your house, but you could actually do it just as well sitting in a chair too. I happen to prefer to walk. I love walking, but of just noticing little things that you might not ever normally notice, and just experiencing a sense of gratitude about the tree, about the nice solid walls, about the colors in my room. Just sitting here in the chair, I can look around and see all kinds of things. The feeling of the chair underneath me, uh, just the fact that we're having this, there's many things. When we start to bring them into conscious awareness, it starts to open up something inside. But there is a way you can take this practice even deeper. And this was just shared with me very recently by a friend. And it's kind of looks kind of about the same thing, but what you do is the shift the gratitude to the gratitude for the inner experience. So it can start with, like, for hearing, for sound. So I can just kind of notice the sounds, and then it's less about feeling grateful for whatever the sound is to the inner experience of it. So it brings this to a much deeper, and you can do this with sight and with physical sensations. And in fact, it's actually really worth spending some time picking out one and spending a minute or 10 minutes just with that one, and just noticing, feeling grateful for hearing, feeling grateful for vision, feeling grateful for sensations, whatever it is. When I practice that one, it really creates a very profound, grounded, spacious place. And it's another way of connecting to that inner presence that it has a little bit of a different quality than doing it with images or just inside. It really is, it has a much more embodied sense about it. So that's the gratitude walk plus.
Love it.
Gratitude walk plus. I just give it a try. It's kind of sounds pretty simple. And you notice the mind wandering, and then you just bring the attention back, just like any meditation practice. But I find in doing that, the gratitude really creates a very big space where whatever the fear is there, it just is not as big of a deal. It's not like it's been pushed out, but it's just not as big of a deal. There's not as much attachment, and there's a little bit more clarity around, a little different perspective about it. And in particular, that belief, oh, I deserve this in some way, which may be operating very unconsciously, it really comes up for healing. So it's a really useful practice.
This morning I was out on my walk, and there's a special place over where I go down by the water and the channel, and everything was so still, and there was like a little mist of fog coming up, and it was so still and so beautiful and just so calm. Everything was so calm, so still. It was such a moment in time that, again, you're talking about the gratitude walk. I was so immersed in that experience. Yeah, beautiful.
It really, for me, it's very connecting. It connects me with something much, whatever my restriction is. Gratitude really opens doors. It's a bridge. So it feels good in itself, but it's actually a useful tool. It's a bridge internally. And so there's another one here, and it's called The Way I See It Now.
I like that.
We can actually do this one. I'll describe it, but we could do a short version. We could do it together if you wanted to, Kornelia. I'll just tell you how this one works here. So it starts with something that we might be experiencing in our life that's disturbing to us, some situation, and just kind of going inside. You don't even have to share what it is, actually.
Okay.
You can. Often you would do it as with a partner. You would just say briefly, not the whole story, but just name briefly what it is. And then you take that inside, and you really connect with the embodied experience of it. Where do you feel it in your body? And it's not, we give usually labels like fear, but okay, what is the feeling, the kinesthetic, the body embodied experience of that, whatever it is, in or around the body. And just really take some time to really embody that, and kind of like extend some gratitude, just extending love to whatever the sensation is, whatever it is. And we've kind of, the story has kind of faded in the background for the moment. We're just being with the embodied experience of it, and just extending gratitude, extending love to it. And then after a period of time, then we can kind of just come back and just kind of look at whatever the thing that's been disturbing, and how do I see it now? How do I see it now? And it's not putting pressure on ourselves that it's got to be different. It might not be.
Mm-hmm.
The form of it might be identical, but maybe we can be seeing it through different eyes, from a different perspective.
You definitely have to apply the word willing.
Willing is everything. Willing, if you try to force it, nothing works if you try to force it. So it's got to be willing, and willingness means that means nothing happens at all.
Yeah, because I can certainly see, someone that that's angry or that's pessimistic, how if there's the resistance and they don't want nothing.
Well, yeah, then you can get something that will just simply reinforce what's already there.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying, somebody could, nothing's changed, it's still the same kind of pessimism, energy.
Yeah. So we're actually not trying to necessarily try to directly change the situation, but we kind of get in touch with the embodied experience of this situation, mm-hmm. and just extend a little. Basically, we're just extending a little gratitude, a little love to that. And then it's an experiment. It's like an experiment. There's not an agenda of something that's supposed to happen.
Right.
So it's like just doing a little experiment. I wonder what happens if I do this.
Yeah. I love that.
Do you want to try it? We can just do it we don't have much time, but we could do a really short version of it.
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna come up with something here, and you can come up with something, and we'll do kind of a short version. Usually you would space this out much longer than the few minutes that we would have here, but I don't know. I'm curious what would happen.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna close my eyes and see what comes up here. Okay, and then I've got something. Then just kind of notice the embodied experience of that. Wherever I feel in my body or around my body. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes, and I'll just say briefly, there's a person close to me, family member that I've been a little concerned about. So I just took the concern in, extended some love and some gratitude to it, and found that what I was just connected with was just a really deep love with this person. That was all. Very simple. Yeah, the worried about him was kind of like this. Just the love about this person is just like this.
That's beautiful. And what I found for my situation is what ended up shifting and changing is there's more acceptance, mm-hmm. because of the gratitude and the thank you and the of what ended up changing is more acceptance. And when we have acceptance, it's ease. There's ease in that. There's ease in that. There's ease in that. And that's ease. And so that's really good. So we've got less than 2 minutes. Dennis, what would you like to say to the audience before we close this holy show?
Okay, cool. Basically, I think the more that we are willing to let our own, the more that I'm willing to let my own way of seeing go and allow something else to come in, the more I start to trust that something else. So there's a developing trust in who I am and who we all are. And that's the potential gift is we become more and more trusting of some greater truth that's in us than this little personality we thought we were.
Thank you, Dennis. It's been a beautiful show. Thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in. Everyone, share this show with all of your friends so we can help people bring more love into their fear. Thank you so much for being
All
here.
right.
See
Thank
you
you,
next time.
Cornelia. Blessings.
Thank you.
Blessings to everyone. Bye-bye.